May 21st, Shrek is back.
Shrek and Donkey on another whirlwind adventure.
With bigger bubbles.
That is nasty.
A bigger cookie.
It's alive!
And bigger surprises.
Come here, little kitty, kitty, kitty.
Shrek 2.
Hello.
This film not yet rated. Starts Friday, May 21st everywhere.
I'm hosting this week's episode of Pantheon Plus. It's my last entry into the underrated sequel journey that we're on right now. I know that I've hosted a lot more episodes than Jerome on this journey, but it's just the way that things kind of played out with the timeline and everything and going chronologically with the movies. I chose some earlier stuff in the century. Jerome kind of picked some more modern stuff from this past century. So that's kind of how we're evening it out. But right now we're in the year 2004. And the movie is Shrek 2. Before we get into the movie, though, we just asked you to leave a 4 or 5 star review on any of those, podcast apps you're listening to, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever. It helps people discover the show and, all the other shows on the real world. So please help us with that. And Jerome, when I was going through this list, when I was picking my movies for this list at the end of last year, I brought this up and I looked at this article and many different articles, and apparently Gen Z or whatever generation is under us, like the 25 to 30-year-olds right now, apparently really love this movie, and they would love it way more than Shrek 1. And going into this movie, I was with the kind of guy that was like, dude, Shrek 1 is like a classic. Nothing could top it. And I had seen Shrek 2 multiple times earlier when it came out, during the Blockbuster days when the third one came out, and we put the second one on display at the video store. So, it's not like I hadn't seen this movie before. It's just I hadn't seen it in such a long time with 2023 glasses. And looking at it now, it seems like Shrek 2 is a way better script than the first one. And it's got a way better villain. And I didn't notice this until now. But, man, like, the villain in this movie is really well developed. Fairy Godmother. So, Jerome, were you kind of on the same page as I was? Were you kind of shocked at how good this was 20 years later?
I would say that I really like the first half of Shrek 1, and I really am not a fan of the second half. Like, if I were to put a number to it, like, the first half is like an 8 out of 10, and the second half is like a 4 out of 10. So I'm not as high on the first Shrek as probably most people are in terms of this franchise. So I walked into this kind of with an open mind, and I definitely think that Shrek 2 is good. I do think it's better than the first one. I don't think I'm as high on it as you are. I think you really love this movie. I like this movie, and it makes me curious to go back and watch the entire Shrek franchise, even though from what I remember, 3 and 4 are not very good, but I definitely need to go back. And I will say, Brian, our timing is, as always, impeccable because we are coming off. I have recently seen, just in the last couple of weeks, the 6th entry in the Shrek series, which is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And I have to say, in my personal opinion, I think it's the best movie in the Shrek franchise. So maybe that's something we need to talk about at some point. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, because it is really, really good. And the ending heavily implies a new Shrek sequel. So that is also something to look forward to, as well as potentially a Shrek 5 coming out sometime in the next few years.
Yeah, I would love to watch Puss in Boots 2, except I haven't seen Puss in Boots 1 probably since it came out and remember nothing from it. So when I go on the Peacock app, guess what I can't find, Jerome? Puss in Boots 1. So I don't know what the fuck is going on. I don't know if I'm just not finding it on the right app, but when I look it up on Google, it says I got to buy it on Vudu or whatever and pay the extra $4. And I'm just like, okay, I don't know what Universal's doing or DreamWorks, but get your shit together, because you want people to watch the sequel who haven't seen the first one, put the first one on the network, man. I don't know, just me talking out loud, but I was kind of frustrated because you keep recommending it, and I really want to watch it, especially in theaters. But I want to watch the first one, but I can't really, and I have to go through these obstacles to do that, so it's kind of annoying. But get your shit together, DreamWorks, because yeah, if you want people to watch the sequel, put the first one up. So going back to Shrek 2, $150 million budget, grossed $928 million worldwide, the highest grossing movie of 2004, which I thought was a mistake because Spider-Man 2 came out that year and made a ton of money as well, but this actually outgrossed Spider-Man 2. So that's pretty incredible. And to this date, it's the highest grossing DreamWorks movie ever. Nothing's going to come close to it, not even Shrek 3 or 4. And I guess that's kind of, diminishing returns in that department because of the scripts and all that kind of thing and the negative reviews for those movies. But let's say Shrek 5 has an awesome review, and a lot of support behind it. It could beat it, theoretically. You never know. But, this was, already in production once Shrek 1 was like in post, because they realized, okay, we got these, we got all these actors together. This is clearly going to be a franchise. We got to keep it moving. Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, the screenwriters of the first Shrek film, they wanted a different story for this movie, and Andrew Adamson, the director, kind of disagreed. So they left the project, and what ended up happening was, instead of following the narrative of like a traditional fairy tale and taking it off course, which is the first one, they actually pretty much just did a remake of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Now, I had never realized this until Jerome actually texted me right at the beginning when I was watching Shrek 2 the other night. And once he did that, I was like, oh my God, this movie completely just changed for me in terms of perspective and what this movie's really about. And then you kind of focus more on what the fairy godmother's saying and her dialogue and the mean things that she is saying. And it's clearly like, oh, she's racist. It's not just about like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, she doesn't like ogres and this whole thing about like, being anti-ogre. It's just like, it's this, message about racism. And I'm just like, oh my God, she's the Spencer. Well, she's not really the Spencer Tracy of it all. So that's more, the king, Harold. But yeah, if you've never seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I would highly recommend it. I haven't seen it in years, but everyone in that movie is really great. The only fucked up thing, I don't know if you know this, Jerome, but almost everyone got an acting nomination except for Guess Who?
I'm not sure.
Sidney Poitier, the only guy to not get a nomination.
I mean that's pretty much par for the course.
I know that pisses. When I looked that up, I was so pissed because he's like the star of that movie, and as great as Spencer Tracy is in that movie, and that is actually Spencer Tracy's final role. I think he's just outshined by Sidney Poitier, but that's just me, and it's kind of one of those Hollywood things back in the '60s, making a movie about anti-segregation and bringing races together, and you don't nominate the black lead actor. So there you go. But
that is Hollywood in a nutshell.
And speaking of the far, far away kingdom, kind of looking like Hollywood and Vine, or Hollywood and Rodeo Drive and Beverly Hills and all that. So over the last 10 years, I've explored LA a lot more and looking at all these locations and in downtown LA and the rich parts of LA and comparing it to the poor parts of LA. So looking back now, when they go to far, far away land and you see like the Burger King is Burger Prince and Old Navy instead of Old Navy, like all these variations, and even the Starbucks joke. I don't know if you noticed, Jerome, but at one point in the movie, Starbucks get, quote unquote, actually it's a Farbucks, excuse me, gets destroyed, and every one of the Farbucks goes across the street to the other Farbucks, which is, that legendary joke by Lewis Black about the end of the world, where it's like, it's the end of the world, and you're leaving a Starbucks, and you go across the street to another Starbucks. So I thought just, wow, just the attention to detail for those little kind of jokes. It just made me even more like appreciate the visuals of this movie even more because of the amount of detail they went into this far, far away land, and like all the little details that I'm probably still missing out even now in the fourth or fifth viewing. But that's one of those things where you got to credit the visual effects artist for taking it so like to the detail and like making the little jokes even more funnier for like the adults once you notice it. So those little things I really appreciate. And there's a lot of like, parody advertisement in here. And during the time, Shrek 2 like had a lot of merchandising as well. And we talked about the merchandising for Lost World. I would say it was probably on the level for this because Shrek 2 was all over the place. I remember the Burger King stuff as well. So a very highly marketable movie. It really stuck out with kids. And it was, the highest grossing movie of 2004. So you put all that together and it's like, how did you come to this realization that's underrated? Well, the thing is at the time, like, I think for like me, my age, kids my age, we all love the first one more. But the kids like younger than me, like my brother's 7 years younger than me, and one of my best friends is 7 years younger than me, and both of them tell me like Shrek 2 is way better. And this was before I put it on the list. I'm like, what are you talking about? Shrek 1's the classic one. And they're like, no, dude, you got to watch Shrek 2 again. It's like it's got all these messages, and the villain's better than the first one. And so that's what I kind of went into going with this pick. I didn't expect to like Shrek 2 as much as I did on this viewing. And I think it's because just age and the way that the script has kind of grown and kind of like matured a little bit. Like I felt like the script, like kind of like for 20 years later, it still has some relative, things like, especially the fairy godmother and making these like conservative Republican type insults because she's so like anti-ogre and anti-monster. And at one point she mentions the big bad wolf, right? And the big bad wolf is just chilling in the Fiona Tower from the Shrek 1 because they're on vacation or whatever. But Prince Charming goes in and tries to save Fiona, but she's not there, and he meets the wolf. And then later on, Fairy Godmother just goes like, all you did was find a gender-confused wolf. And I was like, oh my God, to say that now in 2023 is one of the most fucked up things you can do to a person who is transgender or just exploring themselves. You know what I mean? And let's face it, the wolf is not even trans. And there is a trans character in this movie played by Larry King, the bartender. But I don't know. It's just weird that like the wolf is not even like, he's just dressing in old woman's clothing. That's fine. People can do that, enjoy themselves while reading Pork Illustrated or whatever the freaking magazine he was reading. Just the little details. But just comparing it from the first and second one, I think like the second one really explores more of those like adult themes, but also explores more of like, racism in our country, and segregation and this thing about being anti-ogre. And once you put it with like the 2023 glasses on, I think it becomes a much better experience. And I think that's what happened with me, because I was looking at all these little details like, man, like with 2023 vision, this seems a lot more, not necessarily woke. I don't like to use that term much, but really like they put like those glasses on for 2023 and you're like, wow, man, this movie was kind of ahead of its time, it feels like. But I don't know if you got that feeling too, Jerome, but I feel like this script really kind of matures well with time.
I think so. I think the problem with the first Shrek is that it very much is Jeffrey Katzenberg waving a middle finger at Disney because there's so much focus on the parody aspects and like poking fun at Disney. And you do still get some of that here with Pinocchio and the gingerbread man and the mice and the wolf, and you still get a little bit of that, but it is definitely much more focused on the idea of a plot. And I think that the Shrek franchise, part of what makes it so uniquely kind of this era of animation is the fact that it is simultaneously trying to be very contemporary. The scene you mentioned with all those stores and whatnot, but just the type of humor, a very cynical type of humor that I don't think has aged very well. And I think that is part of the problem with the first one, especially. I think you still get a lot of that in the second one. And again, I can't help but compare this to Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, in terms of the humor, is much more timeless, I would say. And I think that is the type of movie that is going to hold up so much better. And I would say the same thing about a lot of Disney movies. I mean, certainly there are those moments in Disney movies that are very racist, like the Siamese cats. Like that doesn't hold up well. And the crows and things of that nature, and Peter Pan, like some of the scenes with indigenous people, like those things are not going to hold up well. But in terms of like the style of humor and the type of stories, I think that tends to hold up better than the Shrek movies, because like I said, I thought Shrek 2 was better than the first one, but I'm always a little bit cool to this franchise because just the style of humor does not really connect with me, and it's never really connected with me. Like, I don't want to say that this is like, oh, this is like Scary Movie, because these movies actually do have their own plot. I definitely laugh a lot more at Shrek than I do the Scary Movies, but I think in some ways they are going for a very similar vibe in that they are trying to parody, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, There's a Mission Impossible reference, and there's numerous other references as well. But so yeah, I think that's kind of where I come down on this movie. I'm not saying that Shrek 2 is bad necessarily, but I think the thing that would prevent me from saying, oh, this is an all-time classic, like perhaps members of Gen Z, is the style of humor and some of the jokes that are made. And I mean, the fact that, I think Mike Myers is a very specific type of comedian, and it's one of those things, I think, in these situations, I think comedians, if they have a good 10-year run, I think that's about how it goes. Like, I think I look at so many comedians and it's like they have a good 10 years and then kind of comedy evolves, and it evolves past a lot of these guys. And unless they kind of evolve into doing other things or doing different types of comedies or going into more serious roles, then what ends up happening is they kind of get left behind. And I think that is what happened with Mike Myers. I think it's happened with Eddie Murphy. I think it's happened with Will Ferrell. The reason that I think Bill Murray has been able to kind of maintain a longer run is because he's done a lot more dramatic roles. So that's kind of where I come down on this movie.
Yeah, I kind of wish Mike Myers went down that road, because I'm a big Mike Myers fan. I loved his movies in the 90s. Like, I almost picked all Mike Myers movies for my underrated sequels. The Shrek 2, Austin Powers 2, which we kind of debated a little bit whether or not that was underrated. And then Wayne's World 2, which I definitely do think is underrated because I like that more than the first one. But yeah, like Mike Myers, I feel could have done more. Like, he had that small role in Inglourious Bastards, which people don't even recognize him as. He also had that small role in Bohemian Rhapsody. So it's not like he can't do it. I just feel like he doesn't want to do it for like long role, extended roles. I think he just likes to do short, dramatic stuff and just be done with it. Because then he went back and did the Pentaverant, which was like a, just comedy series that no one really watched on Netflix, but only popped certain people from the 90s. So I get it. It's like he's selective, but he could have done more, and that's fine. But he's making that Shrek money because he's clearly making so much money from Shrek and the franchise that he doesn't need to do all that stuff anymore. He could just do whatever he wants, and he did the Pentaverant. So that's kind of the mindset of Mike Myers, and I kind of respect it. But I still love his run in the 90s. Like, I still think So I Married an Axe Murderer is one of the most underappreciated comedies, not just of the 90s, but ever. It doesn't get enough love, and I think it's still on Hulu if you want to check that out. But so this movie introduced Puss in Boots, and Antonio Banderas did a hell of a job, and I'm so glad they added him in this series because I think he elevated the series a little bit. He made the character at a crew. It's not just Shrek and Donkey and Fiona now. You had Puss in Boots. It becomes like a crew, more so of a family, and they kind of jived well. And I thought Antonio Banderas did such a great job performing the voice work and doing the hairball gimmick and doing the choking thing. It was just great. Like, he really went out and just went all for it. And he got rewarded for it, but not just doing the third one and the fourth one, but got his own movie and the sequel that just came out. So credit to Antonio Banderas. And I love the little subtle nods to the other, his other movie. Well, just mainly, I guess, The Mask of Zorro, which I've been pushing for, I don't know, quite a while to review on this podcast. We might do it, but it would have to be under the Hero Pantheon banner because I think technically that counts as a superhero movie and it follows all the check marks of a superhero movie, all the boxes. So, but yeah, I loved how he does the line "not bad at all," which of course is from The Mask of Zorro, and the fight with Mike Myers as Puss in Boots. That's more of an homage to, actually, I don't know if you noticed, but Austin Powers 2 with the fight with Minnie on the moon. It was almost shot for shot the same because it was the same kind of proportions. So I was like, oh, wow, they did the thing where Mini-Me pops out of the suit in the middle like Alien. But in this case, they were probably thinking of Alien, but they probably forgot that Mike Myers also actually did it in Austin Powers 2. So I thought that was a really funny gag that kind of had some layers to it. And not only that, but you mentioned they poke fun at Disney, but also they kind of pay respect to Disney a little bit because I feel like in this movie, they kind of paid homage to Beauty and the Beast with the transformation stuff. And then you see Cogsworth and Lumiere being transformed from those henchmen in the Godmother factory. So it's clearly paying homage to that. And then at the end of the movie, when they transform back into ogres, Like that was almost like a shot for shot of Beauty and the Beast at the end with the Beast. So it's not like they were just poking fun at Disney. They were also paying homage to it a little bit, because I think Beauty and the Beast was also an influence on this movie by just the idea of the transformation and the spell and the potion by midnight, that kind of gimmick. So that kind of worked for what story was trying to tell. But adding in the guest who's coming to dinner part, I think really kind of elevates it. So in terms of the story, it takes place right after Shrek 1. Like they're on their honeymoon, and then Fiona asks Shrek to meet her parents, and they go to far, far away. And that night they have dinner, and the dinner does not go well at all. And they're just kind of angry eating at each other, which I thought was pretty funny with King Harold and Shrek. We find out later on Fairy Godmother is like this mob boss for Far, Far Away, and it's kind of like she's pretty much, it feels like she's the one running the town because she's got all these magic potions that can control so many things. And it made me think of oh my God, has she made so many potions for so many dudes that there's a bunch of wives out there that never wanted to marry their husbands? And that got me thinking of just consent and all these different things. And it kind of makes Fairy Godmother even more evil when I started thinking about it, because man, she just doesn't give a shit about consent. Obviously, she just wants power, and she's just power hungry, and that really plays into what she does in the movie. At one point, King Harold puts a hit on Shrek, which I thought was hilarious because he goes into that tavern, which apparently is based off the Prancing Pony from Lord of the Rings. And if you kind of look at the design, it kind of matches that kind of design and feel. And I think there's other Lord of the Rings references in that scene in particular. But just the idea of finding Puss in Boots to put a hit on Shrek, I thought that was hilarious. And then of course it backfires and Puss in Boots joins Shrek in the gang because he respects Shrek. Nice obvious little twist there, but I love the idea of King Harold putting a hit on Shrek and acting like nothing's going on or whatever. And then him and Godmother come up with the idea of somehow, let's see if we can get Shrek out of the picture. And they're trying to come up with an idea, and then Shrek ends up going to Fairy Godmother for help because apparently Fiona back in the day was obsessed with the idea of Prince Charming, right? Which is, of course, a given because she's a princess growing up. And then once the curse happens, she kind of, obviously changes a person. But, when Shrek sees her old diary from being a little girl, it was like, okay, I'm not the man she wants, or at least that's what he thinks, which is really sad. You know what I mean? Which triggers his journey pretty much. And that kind of pulls him into his journey of wanting to become human and being what Fiona wants or what he thinks she wants. So I thought that was a really cool, the way that was written, very a love story kind of thing, but it's also that thing of self, because in the first one, you do have that theme of self-hate, he doesn't like himself too much. And then with Fiona, he learns to appreciate himself and for the ogre that he is, that kind of thing. So I like that direction that it tried to take, or that it did take. And then once he turns human, it's just oh my God, he's this hot dude who's really they made him jacked. So I really appreciated that. And then all the girls that fight him in the barn, I don't know, it just felt like that scene was so horny, but just I don't know if it's inappropriate or not, but that's that style of humor that I don't know if you that you're talking about that you didn't really like. But when he transformed and Donkey transformed, man, I was so into it. I don't know. How are your feelings of this up to this point of the movie with the whole transformation thing and the Fairy Godmother stuff?
I think the transformation is an interesting idea. Let's make Shrek hot. I think that is a good idea just conceptually, because we kind of, the reverse was true. It was about Fiona in the first one, and now let's see what happens with Shrek and kind of the story that evolves from there. It's really, I think that there's a lot of this that hasn't necessarily aged well. I think you mentioned the consent and the fact that when Shrek becomes human, all the women are just completely into him right away, to the point where he's sleeping and he literally wakes up and there's 4 women that are ready to jump his bones. I think that there's some funny moments. I think the best moments, actually, and I think this is true for a lot of Shrek, is the funniest moments are the things that are not necessarily plot related. I think the interactions that Shrek and Donkey have are pretty amusing, but a lot of that doesn't have to do with the crux of the movie. I think the same is also true once Puss in Boots becomes a part of the action. But I think the movie eventually, I think it does work out. The one thing I will say is I think the third act of this movie is significantly better than the third act of the first movie. I think just thematically, I think it works a lot better, and I just think it's a lot less clunky because I think just the stakes are much more clear. Like the stuff in the first one with Fiona is very much a mystery, and it just kind of builds up, and then you also have Farquaad, who just isn't as interesting of a villain. Like I think John Lithgow does a solid job as Farquaad, but in this movie, I just think it's much more focused around the fairy godmother and Charming, and kind of building off what happened in the first one, and then these characters are just better able to kind of be villains, and because you've got some of the history with the first one. Yeah, I think it's very well done. I also couldn't help but think of like Frozen, just because of who the villain in the first Frozen especially turns out to be, and I couldn't help but make those connections. So I'm very curious to know, obviously Disney heavily influenced the Shrek movies to kind of go another direction with the humor. I would be very curious to think about Frozen in terms of like how was Frozen influenced by Shrek, because Frozen is very, very much a fairy tale. And you could make a case that Olaf is like the equivalent of a donkey or someone of that nature. And I do have to say, Frozen 2 actually would be a really good contender for underrated sequel, because I actually think the second Frozen is better than the first one, which is that might be a hot take, but yeah, I think just in terms of thinking about how these movies relate to each other, I think Shrek 2, it just functions better as a like fairy tale without being a parody of a fairy tale, even though those moments do exist.
Yeah, I thought about that too. And I don't know if it's because, well, I think what also had an influence on Frozen was Rapunzel. Was it Rapunzel? The one with Mandy Moore, which was like I think 2 years or 3 years before it.
Yeah, Rapunzel came out in 2010. That's one of the few Disney movies that I have never seen, and I've heard that it's very good, and that movie clearly is influenced by kind of Shrek as well.
Yeah, it's got that vibe to it, and that's why I brought it up, because they're actually cameos of Rapunzel and the guy, or whatever. I forget if he's a prince or not, but they actually have a cameo in the background of Frozen. So that's what made me think, like, because obviously when Disney movies do that, they're implying that they're connected in the shared universe, or certain movies are in a shared universe, and Rapunzel and Frozen makes total sense the way that those universes are connected. So I was like thinking like that, and then because Rapunzel, I think Rapunzel's the one with the evil fairy godmother as well. So I again, Shrek 2 probably had a big influence because of that, because fairy godmother up to this point was never like a villain in any like movies or TV shows. Usually it's always been like the savior, the end of the day, Cinderella, whatever. But in this case, she's like a mob boss. And I love that turn or that twist on the character, and the way that she's just manipulating the whole town or whatever. The shady underbelly of Far, Far Away. That's the kind of the way I think of it. So I really appreciated that. So when you get to the third act, you mentioned how great of a third act it is compared to the first one. But what really like stuck out for me is the fact that it takes place at night. Now, we've always had this discussion about action sequences at night, the third act, and how you can't see shit sometimes. In this case, it felt like they watched the two towers, looked at how a castle's lit at night for it to, pop on the screen, and they're like, okay, let's just do that. And it worked because you could actually see what's going on. So credit to the animators for doing a third act finale at night with a lot of action, because there was a lot of action stuff, like a lot of magic going on. An awesome headbutt by Fiona, which I got to credit to. Like, that made me laugh maybe the hardest, because I forgot about it, and she just gives him a headbutt and just like knocks him the fuck out. So that was hilarious. But also the giant gingerbread doing the Godzilla gimmick, and they actually used the Godzilla roar from the original movie, which of course popped me. But yeah, that third act really has a lot going on, but it all kind of comes together at the right moment. Even as a tragic moment when you find out King Harold was the frog, like the original Frog Prince or whatever, which is sad, because it actually made me think like, God, there's a whole other great story to tell right there, and they just kind of like glossed over it. You know what I mean? And that's, I'll talk about the weaknesses, but I felt like if you're going to introduce that aspect of it, give us like a 2-minute flashback and tell that story just really quick to satisfy us. You know what I mean? But Oh well, they didn't do it. Which I don't even think they touched upon in 3 or 4, maybe. But there's a good story to tell there, obviously, and they didn't do it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And I think in certain, I think the original DVD had this like American Idol like parody where like
It does. I think I've actually watched it.
I think I watched it a long time ago, but I never watched it again because it's so like irrelevant. But I think people actually got to vote, and there was like an actual winner. I didn't look it up because I didn't really care enough, but I thought that was interesting. It might be on the original DVD. I don't know if it's on the Shrek 2 Blu-ray, but I guess that's one of those hidden things that Easter eggs that people look out for because I've heard like certain things about it, and I think they actually got Simon Cowell, which is really cool, but again, really irrelevant to the story. But that's pretty much Shrek 2 in a nutshell. Like, I think the story's better than the first, obviously, and this is where we get into the strengths. But a great script, funny dialogue. I think fantastic performances by most of the cast. I think certain people like stood out more, and I don't know so when you're casting Jennifer Saunders as the fairy godmother, and the fact that she's got all these singing parts, but yet you still have Julie Andrews there, but doesn't sing. And we know Julie Andrews is this legendary singer from The Sound of Music and all that stuff. So, and Mary Poppins. So I don't know. As a casting director, I was kind of like looking at this thinking like, man, I would have totally put Julie Andrews as the villain. Like that's what I would have done. But I don't know. How do you feel about that? Because
Julie Andrews. I think the problem might be that maybe Julie Andrews' voice isn't in good shape, and maybe she doesn't want to sing. Like I think that might be the reason, and I think that's perfectly logical. Like at this point in Julie Andrews' career, I mean, Julie Andrews is still with us as of this recording, so I really think it's one of those things where maybe she just didn't want to do it, and I think again that's perfectly reasonable. I think Jennifer Saunders just does a really good job in this role, and I can't even imagine like just if you look at her IMDb, she is definitely somebody who has been in a lot of animated movies. She was in Spice World, which is not animated, but she was in Coraline. She was in the Minions. Do you realize who she played in the Minions, Brian?
Didn't she play Gru's mom?
She played the Queen.
Oh, wait, who? No, Julie Andrews. Someone played. Okay, I know both of them are in the Minions franchise, but I know one of them plays Gru's mom, and then the other plays the bad guy. So yeah.
And she's also in Sing 2, so she's definitely gotten around and done a lot of voice work and all that. So I think it kind of makes sense, and I get why Julie Andrews would not want to sing at this point in her career. And we're talking about this like 20 years ago. I mean, it's got to be tough, especially when you are known for The Sound of Music, which is generally regarded as one of the greatest musicals of all time. It's tough, but I think they both do a good job in their roles. And I will say, I think that Mike Myers is solid as Shrek. I think that voice just it works out. Eddie Murphy as the donkey is fine. There are just some days that I wish that Eddie Murphy had not gone into family comedies because boy, oh boy, it feels like his career just screeched to a halt. And he's like, Dolomite Is My Name was really good. I did not like the Coming to America sequel, and the next movie that he's going to be in, You People, looks absolutely dreadful. So I really wanted the Eddie Murphy renaissance, and it doesn't look like we're going to get it, Brian, and I'm very sad.
Well, we're never going to review Pluto Nash or that Haunted Mansion movie. So there you go.
There is no chance. not a chance in hell that happens.
Some other quick things on the strengths. I think the pacing was excellent. I felt like there was never a dull moment, and I think that's very crucial for like an animated movie because the kids get bored, man. And there's been some times in some animated movies where I'm just kind of like, okay, this is gonna be boring. It's kind of boring right now. We need to get it going. But other the pacing was just like going, and never stopped. I think visually the effects are much better than the first one. And I think adding, Puss in Boots was a big plus. And I thought Antonio Banderas did a fantastic job. And of course, I think, the message of, like accepting yourself for who you are and that kind of thing that kind of leads from the first one, but they really like exemplified here in the second one. I think that's a great message for kids and adults, and for adults to kind of teach that lesson to their kids or nephews or nieces or whatever. I think that's a great message to spread. And I think this movie kind of hammers that down a lot. And then the idea of, I don't want you as human. I want you as an ogre, and that's the happy ending. So they really pulled it off. In terms of weaknesses, though, Fiona gets less to do, and that's kind of disappointing. But I don't know if that's just the way, because I know they cut some stuff out, but I don't know how much they cut out per se, because there's obviously deleted scenes and stuff. But it felt like Fiona kind of took a back seat because it felt like she had way less dialogue than the first. But I don't know if that's just me kind of like, I don't know, imagining things or whatever. But it did feel like she had less to do. Julie Andrews doesn't sing. That's kind of my weaknesses, because I think, she may have been, doesn't want to do it anymore. But man, like, I don't know. It was just weird to see a legendary actress singer in a musical that didn't sing. It's just one of those things that kind of threw me off. And then, of course, I mentioned the King Harold, Queen Lillian relationship. So to me, if you're going to introduce this idea that he was the Frog Prince or whatever, you're just glossing over it and you're like, oh my God, I want to know that story. And I think they kind of touched upon it, and maybe the other one's the one with Rumpelstiltskin, but not a full, like, 2 to 5 minute sequence. Or if you wanted to do a short, that's fine with me. But it kind of just made it like, oh man, that's kind of like a sad thing they did at the end. They kind of just like, or whatever about it. And the fact that Queen Lillian just accepted him as the frog again, meaning that she knew he was a frog at some point. So there's this weird thing there that they kind of glossed over that I really want him to explore just for like 2 minutes, because that was such an interesting twist the first time around. And then, of course, watching it all these years later, it's like, man, that's such a tragic thing to do to a character. But at the same time, he did kind of deserve it for putting a hit on Shrek or whatever. But, it is what it is. And John Cleese did a good job doing his voice. So my MVP is Andrew Adamson, because he had to make that decision to kind of separate from the writers of the first one and go in his own direction. And I think it worked. And I think going into this direction really paid off. And I think the best performances are Jennifer Saunders and Antonio Banderas tied together, because I thought Antonio Banderas did such a great job. And of course, Jennifer Saunders just killed it with the songs and like the dialogue she had to put on, and just this manner in which she's speaking. And it's a condescending manner, which is like, what I think that what it's supposed to be is like, she thinks that she knows more than you and she knows better than you, but she really doesn't. And deep down, she's just this racist. So I think she played that well with the way she put her voice and, handled her voice. And it, at certain times it did feel like she was kind of like being condescending to Shrek, and Shrek didn't realize it, which was the whole point of her character. And I think it worked well. And underrated, of course, I'm going to say yes.
I'm going to agree with you that I think this movie is underrated. I think I had a really hard time thinking about the MVP in terms of, because I think, the voice of Mike Myers, and I think he drives a lot of the success of this franchise. I think Eddie Murphy does as well. But on the other hand, I think it's unfortunate. I think this movie kind of protracted the trend of having celebrities do the voices in these movies and not necessarily getting the best people to do the voices. So I'm going to agree with you. I think anytime you can have an animated movie, I think the director deserves a lot of the credit for putting it together, getting the animators to do what they're supposed to do. And for me, Antonio Banderas is easily the best performance. And the fact that he got his own spinoff because of his performance in this movie, and I would assume the next two, I think it's pretty easy to say that he is the MVP just in terms of making this movie work. And even though he's kind of in a supporting role, yeah, it's very good. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed Shrek 2. I don't think it's a classic by any means, but I would put this right along the same lines as like Shrek 2 and European Vacation. I think both of these movies are underrated and better than the first movie, even though I think they're similar in some ways. But I think that European Vacation and Shrek 2 are funnier. I think they're more focused, and I think they just work out a little bit better than their originals.
And I swear, when I was putting this list together, I did not have that connection in mind of Chevy Chase doing the Sound of Music parody, and then having Julie Andrews in this from the Sound of Music. I didn't even make that connection in my mind when I put this list together. But that's usually how my brain works, apparently, because sometimes the subconscious kind of just puts things together without you even realizing it. So there you go. And really quick, I forgot to mention my honorable mentions, because there were some movies that I actually considered, but didn't put on the list. Madagascar 2, I think it's the best one out of the Madagascar series. That's the one that kind of rips off the Lion King, but does it well. And I think that's one of Bernie Mac's last performances. So I highly recommend that one. Kung Fu Panda 2 is also really good. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is also really good. And this one, people forget, Rescuers Down Under. It's the one where the rescuers go to Australia. And when I was growing up, I thought there was only one Rescuers movie, and that was that. And then when I find out there was one from the 70s, I was just kind of like confused. But I'll always remember that giant eagle. Well, it's not really a giant eagle. It looks big in comparison to.
I know what you're talking about. I was also in the same boat. I also did not realize that there was a Rescuers movie that was made in the 70s because I definitely saw the 90s one first.
See, we're on the same boat on that one too, man. And I definitely remember that because they really drew that eagle really fucking scary for a kid. So, yeah, those are my honorable mentions. There's probably some other stuff, too. And there's also another note that Shrek 2 was the first sequel to get nominated for Best Animated Feature. And I thought that was kind of a loaded fact because of the fact that it only got introduced in 2001, the Best Animated Oscar. So you're kind of disregarding like Rescuers Down Under, Toy Story 2, all these other sequels that came out that were animated that didn't.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, Pixar is probably the reason that the Best Animated Oscar exists. So I think saying that Shrek 2, I mean, it's kind of a misnomer.
Yeah, because obviously Toy Story 2 would have obviously won if they had the award in 1998. But Shrek 2 gets that distinction. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Overall, I would give Shrek 2 a 9 out of 10. I know that's kind of high, but it just had this effect on me that I was not expecting. And in comparison, I got Shrek 1 at 8.5. So it definitely goes past the first one. I never thought I would say that all these years later. And apparently my Gen Z friends are onto something because I did not pick up on it. But when Jerome said, "Guess who's coming to dinner?" that completely changed the whole perspective of the movie for me. And I looked at it a different light, and it made Jennifer Saunders' performance just that much better for me. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say 6.5 or 7. I'm not as big of a fan of it as you are, but I definitely think it's still solid. I think it's fun, like mid-tier animation. I think that these movies sometimes get unjustly criticized for some of the things that they're trying to do. But I'm always amused when I sit down and watch at least Shrek 1 and 2. And like I said, I kind of want to go back and just watch all 6 movies, if only Peacock had all 6 available on their service. That would be really nice. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed Shrek 2, and it's been interesting just going through these first few weeks with most of them not being my picks because it's been just being able to watch European Vacation again, Nightmare on Elm Street 3. It's been fun, and now the next 3 weeks, Brian, it's all me.
It's all you. We're not going to reveal the titles once again, but any kind of hints you want to leave, yo?
I am very excited for my run here. Next week we'll be taking a look at something that Sylvester Stallone did, and Brian and I have been exchanging messages about this, so I am very excited to talk about the movie that we're going to be talking about. And then the final 2 are going to be a little bit more divisive. I'm getting Brian to watch a movie that he swore he would never watch, and I know it's going to ruin his childhood, but I think it's going to be worth it. And then the last movie is underrated for I believe it is underrated for a very specific reason that I will get into, but boy, oh boy, the last movie on this list is probably my favorite movie on the list. So we'll see.
Well, there you go. So the next 3 weeks, Jerome's hosting. So I'm going to take a little break, but I will be hosting something special in March, which we won't talk about until the end of the journey we're on for the underrated sequels. So that's it for this week. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next week for Jerome's 3 next movies that are underrated.
Listen, Brian, all I'm going to say is the moment that Puss in Boots came out of the stomach, all I was wondering is if Sigourney Weaver would call Shrek a bitch for that. That's all I wanted to know.